Two experiments in one in this project. First there's this inlay, which looks really complicated, but it's actually very easy. And curved drawers. I've seen drawers that pivot. I've never seen a drawer that slides out in an arc before. On the backside there's a magnet in here, in the drawer, and in the box, and holds it and keeps it from moving around. Since the drawer is moving in an arc, the box has to be made up of arcs too. So this is just a mirror image of each other. I made the decision to make the drawer fronts extend the full width of the box rather than be inside of the top and bottom. I made the pocket for the inlay on my CNC. You could use a router for that. And the inlay is just hand plane shavings and epoxy. The pocket was about 3/16 deep, and I made it that deep so I could use hot glue to hold the shavings in place. I was using the hot glue in the beginning to hold them in place, but towards the end I just tried doing it without that. It was just an extra step. They seem to be staying in place well enough on their own. I used West System epoxy and Mix-All universal tint. The mistake I made was making the hand plane shavings a little too thick. I thought the epoxy would just sort of drain through the bottom, but they didn't. It just sort of pulled up inside of those. So I didn't get as even of a spread, so I had some low spots. And that ended up causing an interesting effect at the end. It ended up looking pretty cool just the way it was, without sanding it flat. I don't know if I could ever use that look for anything, but it's interesting. I used the table saw to get the worst of it off, and then a lot of trips through the drum sander. There were a couple of spots that I wasn't able to get sanded flat, so I just used a little CA glue on the sawdust that was already in there. It would have been better to fill those with epoxy, but I didn't want to mix up another batch. If you were making a whole bunch of these at one time, then it would make sense that you could make one batch of epoxy to fill all the little gaps. Then I could locate my template over the inlay, and I cut out the top. I did not cut the bottom out at the same time because I wanted that to be a little bit oversized. After sanding that to the line, then I just traced it rather than use another copy of the template, and I cut the bottom out oversized. I found a piece of maple that was wide enough to make the sides of the box out of, and I took the pieces I was going to use for the drawer and made sure I planed down the sides of the box so that they were just slightly higher than the combined height of the drawer. Then I could cut out the sides of the box. I only cut the inside face first and sanded that, and then I cut the outside face after that. It's easier to hold those pieces and keep it all square if it's still connected to the rest of the block of wood. After the glue up, I used a flush trim bit to remove the bulk of the material, and it was back to the spindle sander to finish it up, and you don't really need the flush trim bit. It just makes things go a little bit faster. I decided to cut the drawers out with the scroll saw. It'll be faster to do it on the bandsaw and cut through and then glue it together. And again, I only cut out the inside before the glue up. And before gluing it, I traced out the outline of the inside so I could use those as a template to cut the fabric for the lining later on. Then I could cut it out and sand it and test the fit. Then I traced the end of the box onto my drawer front stock, and then matched that up with the template, rather than doing the whole thing from the template, which might not be exactly what I sanded the box to. And say it with me, only cut the inside first. Sand it until you're happy with the fit. And remember, it's not just the box that has to fit, also the drawer has to fit too. Then I could glue the drawer fronts to the drawers, and this is an end grain joint, so I wanted to reinforce that. So I drilled and countersunk and installed screws. Then it was time to drill for the magnets, and the magnets are 1/4 of an inch, but I started with a 1/2 inch bit to make a counterbore. The depth for this counterbore is going to end up being critical, because you need to leave behind the exact thickness of the magnet. But that's almost impossible to do that without being able to get the magnet in there. So I just drilled deep enough to be able to locate it a second time, and then I drilled the 1/4 inch hole. I had to put a scrap block inside of the box to keep the bottom from flexing while it was being drilled into. The one that worked the best was when the magnet in the drawer was just slightly proud of the surface, and the magnet in the box was a little bit below the surface. So that way the drawer just sort of locks into that hole. It's really tough to get that perfect. So that counterbore creates a ledge that I can glue that dowel into, holding the magnet in place and hiding it. The last thing I did was put a round over around the edges, and I got a little chip out on the drawer front. After all that experimenting on this project, it's just the round over that screws me over. So I put a chamfer on the edges, and that also helped hide the less than perfect gap between the drawer and the box. So it worked out. And it didn't really become obvious until the finish went on, but I had sanded so far down the inlay to get it flat that you could start to see where the hot glue was inside of it. And it actually ended up being a pretty cool effect. If I had tried to do that on purpose, I'm sure it wouldn't have worked out. So that's something you can play with if you try this. If you want a solid look, then don't use any hot glue. If you want a sort of marbled look, you can put all kinds of hot glue in there and see what you get. It's just a little bit tricky because it's hard to get that hot glue to be a consistent thickness. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed making this, so let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching.